Anyone who has recently seen photos from the Nanjing exhibitions has surely been reminded of a chapter in history that can never be forgotten. Even today, 80 years later, no Chinese person with a conscience can easily forgive the crimes Japan committed during World War II. But a deeper analysis reveals that the reason China and Japan cannot escape the shadow of this history is not that the Japanese are inherently evil, nor is it because the Chinese are unforgiving. The true underlying cause of all the problems between China and Japan is the United States' leniency toward Japanese war criminals during the establishment of the Cold War order, combined with a series of decisions made by the Kuomintang, or the KMT regime in Taiwan. It is an undeniable fact that the invading Japanese army in China, both in terms of the scale and nature of their actions, were among the most prolific perpetrators of war crimes in the history of modern warfare. Beyond the infamous Nanjing massacre, the war crimes committed by the Japanese military in the Chinese theater alone include, but are not limited to, widespread violation of the Geneva Conventions, including the abuse, enslavement, and mass execution of Chinese prisoners of war, the large-scale and frequent use of chemical weapons, waging biological warfare in multiple regions of China by spreading pathogens like plague and cholera, causing massive civilian casualties, establishing the secret biological warfare research group Unit 731 to conduct extremely cruel human experiments, implementing the three alls policy, kill all, burn all, loot all, to create no man's lands through the organized and systematic mass slaughter of civilians, forcibly conscripting hundreds of thousands of Chinese women to serve as comfort women for the Japanese army. Because the crimes committed by the invading Japanese army in China were too numerous to count, the demand for Japan's unconditional surrender and the severe punishment of its war criminals, as stipulated in the Cairo and Potsdam Declarations, became the only path to justice. When Japan announced its unconditional surrender in August 1945, it not only agreed to accept severe legal sanctions against its war criminals from the Allied powers, but also forfeited any right to bargain. In theory, China, as a victor, could have imposed any form of punishment on Japan. In fact, imposing rational punishment at that time was the best opportunity to permanently end the animosity between the two nations. To understand how Japan could have been punished, we only need to look at the standard answer provided by the Soviet Union in its treatment of Germany. After accepting Germany's unconditional surrender and controlling a large part of its eastern territory, the Soviets first exacted war reparations by dismantling and relocating a vast amount of German industry. They then partitioned eastern Germany, ceding traditional German territories like Silesia, Pomerania. Toxin-laced wastewater was dumped directly into tailings ponds, causing massive pollution that severely impacted the lives of nearby residents and naturally drew the ire of environmentalists. Under this domestic pressure, American rare earth companies began moving their operations abroad, partly by choice and partly by necessity. At that time, China was in the early stages of its reform and opening up, offering numerous incentives to attract foreign capital. With its proximity to raw materials, well-developed infrastructure, and a large, high-quality, low-cost labor force, China was the obvious choice for relocation. The influx of American capital and technology further fueled the boom in China's rare earth industry. As Chinese production surged, entrepreneurs competed fiercely to sell their products, driving the international price of rare earths down to less than $10 per kilogram. In the United States, this price wouldn't even cover the cost of production. For capitalists, there's no sense in a business that loses money with every unit sold. American rare earth companies began shutting down or going bankrupt one after another. In 2002, the Mountain Pass Mine, America's largest rare earth mine operated by Molycorp, officially ceased production. This marked the complete loss of America's domestic rare earth production and processing capability. In the context of globalization and American hegemony, however, most Americans weren't concerned. The prevailing attitude was, if we can't produce it at home, we'll just buy it from China with US dollars. Why waste money and damage America's environment for a few mere rare earths? This complacency was shattered in 2010, after a Japanese patrol boat collided with a Chinese fishing vessel near the Diaoyu Islands and illegally boarded the ship and detained its crew. China used its rare earth production capacity as a weapon for the first time, imposing export controls on Japan. By then, China had replaced the US as the producer of over 90% of the world's refined rare earths. With its supply from China cut off, Japan could find no alternative supplier to fill the gap, sparking a severe panic in its industrial sector. Watching Japan's semiconductor industry, which is heavily reliant on rare earths, get thrown into chaos was a wake-up call for the United States. It was a shocking realization that China had secured a monopoly over the rare earth industry, a monopoly that could also be turned against America. After all, the semiconductor industry is a cornerstone of the U.S. economy, one of the few high-end manufacturing sectors that remained on American soil during the age of globalized supply chains. More importantly, U.S. military hardware requires massive amounts of rare earths, and the powerful military propped up by this advanced weaponry is a key pillar of America's global dominance. If China were to use export controls against the United States, the trouble would be immense. The U.S. government began to take the issue seriously. Seizing the opportunity, Molycorp secured government support to restart the Mountain Pass mine and launched Project Phoenix, a $1.7 billion plan to rebuild the domestic rare earth supply chain, a huge bet on the future of American self-sufficiency. However, Molycorp failed to anticipate that the Obama administration only viewed Project Phoenix as a backup plan. Its primary strategy was to use America's international influence to force China to continue selling rare earths on the cheap. In March 2012, the U.S., along with the European Union and Japan, filed a complaint with the WTO, accusing China's rare earth export controls of violating trade rules. At the time, China's national strength and international influence were far weaker than those of the West. After a 2-year dispute, the WTO ultimately ruled in favor of the U.S., and China subsequently lifted its export controls. With Chinese rare earths flooding the market again, international prices plummeted. Molycorp was stunned. The company had already underestimated the difficulty of rebuilding a rare earth industry in the modern United States and had been operating at a loss for years. Now, with government support dwindling and prices falling even further, its operations became unsustainable. After struggling for a short while, Molycorp filed for bankruptcy in June 2015. The first American attempt to restore domestic rare earth production had ended in failure. After Donald Trump took office and launched a trade war with China, Beijing once again raised the prospect of rare earth controls. This time, China's national power was on a completely different level, and it no longer needed to buckle under international pressure from the U.S. and Europe to manage its own strategic resources. The U.S. recognized this and once again began pushing for rare earth independence, rolling out a series of policies to encourage American companies to invest in the industry. But with the cautionary tale of Molycorp fresh in everyone's mind, what American company would dare bet its future on the consistency of U.S. government policy? Moreover, the American rare earth industry had been dormant for decades. Its technology was severely outdated, and the necessary equipment was no longer in production. Overcoming these hurdles would require a massive investment, yet the potential profits were visibly limited. The entire global rare earth market is only worth about $3.4 billion annually, and any new American venture would have to compete with China's established, efficient industry. An American company would need strong government support just to capture a few $100 million of the domestic market. And that's revenue, not profit. The margins would be razor thin, and it could take decades, if not a century, to recoup the initial investment. American capitalists have always shied away from high-risk, low-profit, long-term projects like this. While some companies entered the industry to collect government subsidies, they have only engaged in small-scale production, positioning themselves for a quick exit at any time. Take MP Materials, which acquired the Mountain Pass mine in 2017 for the low price of $20.5 million. Despite being hailed as a great hope by the U.S. government, the company's refining operations remain small-scale. Ironically, its main source of revenue is exporting rare earth concentrate to China for processing. With American companies acting this way, the U.S. rare earth industry naturally can't recover. While there is some minor output, it is nowhere near enough to meet American demand. Meanwhile, China has been continuously strengthening its ability to control rare earth exports. Then, on April 4, 2025, 2 days after Trump announced new global tariffs, China declared export controls on 7 types of medium and heavy rare earths and related products. The policy instantly choked off the U.S. domestic supply. The U.S. and its allies pleaded with China to restore the supply, but to no avail. Washington scrambled to pour more money into its domestic rare earth companies, trying to spark an expansion of production. On paper, American companies made confident promises to ramp up production quickly, vowing to achieve self-sufficiency in a few years. In reality, months went by with no increase in output. Worse still, in their pursuit of profit, some of these U.S. companies with production capacity effectively became traders. To satisfy their own customers' needs, some American firms went to great lengths to establish connections with smugglers in China to quietly organize illicit rare earth shipments. The U.S. government, prioritizing national interests, tacitly allowed or even secretly supported these activities. But this created a new problem. The smuggled material undercut the prices of the legitimate American producers. This could not stand. To stop the smuggling, these same American rare earth producers used their money and connections to gather detailed evidence of their potential customers' smuggling activities and reported them to the Chinese government. Upon receiving the evidence, the Chinese government launched a crackdown, seizing large quantities of smuggled rare earths and dismantling several domestic smuggling networks. The U.S. suffered a major blow, but the American companies that did the reporting were unfazed. In fact, they profited enormously. With the competition from cheap, smuggled Chinese rare earths eliminated, there was finally a market for their high-priced domestic product. They were able to profit from a national crisis, jacking up their prices to take advantage of the shortage. As rare earth prices soared and demand grew, their stock prices shot up, creating a new legend of wealth. The prospect of reviving the American rare earth industry by relying on companies like these is clearly a fantasy. But in a capitalist country like the United States, all companies are fundamentally aligned in their pursuit of profit. Given this reality, the expert opinion that the U.S. needs at least 10 to 15 years to rebuild its rare earth industry seems overly optimistic. A more likely scenario is that America's progress toward rare earth independence will continue to stall right up until the point where its global hegemony collapses and rare earths are no longer a critical strategic necessity for the nation's survival.